We're here to talk about The Legend of Zelda and what we want out of the next one for Switch 2 or the future, based off of this dark era we're in called the Open Air. No, it's not really a dark era. It's a different era, though, because they've obviously gone full open world and changed a lot of the design philosophies. So I guess I'd be interested to know. So, first off, everybody, I don't even have to. I'll just you guys just go and say your favorite Zelda game. I already know what it is for both of you, but just I think you're in
Yeah,
agreement.
Twilight Princess,
Yeah,
obviously.
Yeah, Twilight
Twilight
Princess is
Princess.
which is basically just Ocarina 2.0, which is basically the main structure of the Zelda franchise, first introduced really in Link to the Past, and then taken into 3D, and then kind of just like iterated on, improved in a lot of ways. They did some good things in all those games. Yeah, I put Twilight as my, you could say like traditional Zelda is my favorite one. I still prefer Majora's as a mood and atmosphere and world, but Twilight's like number two in that way. If I didn't like more things about Majora's Mask, which I don't, but if I did,
Yeah,
it would Twilight Princess would be number one. I would Twilight Princess was number three for me for so long because I played Wind Waker first, and I still love Wind Waker, but Wind Waker I look back on and I was like, this game needed like one or two more dungeons to be fully fledged out and be really good. I think it's still great for what it does, and I like a lot of aspects about it. But yeah, Twilight Princess is where it's at. They all have strengths, obviously. These are my favorite games to talk about because they're very fun and very good, and they do very well for Nintendo, obviously with sales and stuff, and why they've
yeah,
changed things around, right? So they came out with Breath of the Wild being the biggest and best open world game the world's ever seen since Elder Scrolls Skyrim. So, which I guess is a good game. I haven't played much of it, to be fair, but Skyrim was kind of big for the time, right? So, but kind of the basis of what I want to see next, and I've told you guys this before, is what they should do is what's because what Zelda does, it kind of perfects games that came before it and a lot of their designs. So obviously, like Skyrim was the one where it was like really big. You don't have to do the main quest; you can do all this stuff, and it's very open. Well, we had Elder Scrolls, and then we had Zelda, and then since then, the biggest like big open world successful, mind blowing genre generation defining open world game was Elden Ring, which I think Elden Ring is kind of a better open world game than even Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom in terms of obviously not in terms of like invisible walls or barring you off from where to go, but in terms of the flow of the open world, which is what I don't think these newer Zelda games have, is that they just lack flow and differentiation and discoverability through different things. Since you
yeah,
can go one way and you see basically the same stuff, the same like 10 enemies, right? Same like uh, different, like not very different encounters. You have to fight like 40 of the same things in the overworld. Like Elden Ring has the enemy variety, obviously, yes, and the combat that really drives it forward. Um, but and Zelda obviously isn't gonna ever be that. It's never gonna be like very combat intensive or very
no,
RPG, right? So
yeah,
but it does marry like I think it's still a good like action adventure game with puzzle elements and stuff. Like obviously Zelda can lean into the puzzles, which I think is a strength. I still think the newer games have had good puzzle design. It's just the pacing and flow of in between puzzles of like what older Zelda games did so well. These games kind of don't because it's filled with just walking to new areas or building a ship and flying to a new area to do something else.
yeah. I
So
think a huge flaw is where the puzzles are located.
yeah,
Like it's either this world puzzle that has infinite solutions, so it's kind of boring, or in
sure.
the case of like Ultra Hand, kind of tedious,
Oh
and
yeah,
then or it's in a shrine and it has like a million or infinite minus one possibilities to solve it, so it's boring still, and it's in like a very sterile, uncompelling environment.
And
Like,
it's the same environment for
yeah,
like
yeah.
so
It's
it's
a,
not,
a million little objectives.
not that the puzzles are bad on the face of it. It's just like the open endedness makes it not really feel like a puzzle, but more like, I mean, in the case of Tears of the Kingdom, it's very much just like a, I don't know, like engineering project. Like, what can you build or what can you bring in
Yeah,
to like let you skip this?
Yeah.
It really
not
does. It
ever
really
like
does feel kind of like playing like Halo Forge mode, like before you like make it a like a game mode to go along with it and start the game. Just like exiting your Forge ball
right.
and like playing it yourself there.
Yeah, it's like I think a puzzle by definition is something that has pieces missing, and like the Tears of the Kingdom and to some extent Breath of the Wild puzzles are like sure technically puzzles, but it's almost like any piece that you find will work.
Yeah.
Yeah, you remember that vine of like that girl just getting upset when every shape fits in like the square hole.
Yeah,
Yep, yeah,
yeah,
it is
It
that. I think I've seen that
it's
exact
exactly that.
comparison, actually. You bring up a good point. I think I've seen that compared to the puzzle design of the game, which I don't
yeah,
know, like, how I feel about it necessarily. Like, I think if I waited another 5, 10 years to play Tears of the Kingdom and I went back and forgot how I did everything the first time, maybe I would still have fun coming up with my own solutions for things. But
yeah,
it's there is like a and there's a novelty to that, and it is going to be a question of if they're going to do that again. I don't know. Like they already did so much with that concept in this one game, and it was great for what they did with it. But like, I do go back to older Zelda games, and like they have one ways to do things, right? But I still, and maybe it's more so like the dungeon or the story or whatever, like other things that bring me into it than like having to resolve the puzzles I already knew how to do. But
right.
um, like there is a little bit
I
of
don't.
that, but I get what you mean with the puzzle solving. Like it does feel kind of cheap to like undermine the design of like this could be a really cool thing I have to figure out and use logic. It's like, well, we're not really going to use logic. We're just going to make you kind of just be creative and do whatever you want. And I feel like
Yeah,
a lot of so I'm very logic brained when it comes to video games because these are like the older Zelda games are what I like to play, and I like games that are structured and have one way to go and are very intentionally designed, and things to
yeah,
do. Like player expression, I don't think it's very important in a single player game a lot of the time. Like Zelda, it's
I
never.
don't
I
think
mean,
so
obviously it's
either.
been yeah, like it's been important. Like now they're trying to make it more important, but like, what's the payoff? Like a Twitter clip of 30 seconds. Like
Yeah,
obviously the game was very big on Twitter when it came out. I feel like it didn't have a
right.
long tail though. Tears of the Kingdom specifically, but yeah, like player expression just doesn't really matter to me as much as seeing what the art of the design is and experiencing it and bringing it through these moments that they want to do, which I think they excelled at with Ocarina of Time through Skyward Sword in terms of the 3D games. The 2D games are, I've always
Yeah, I
kind of the
think
same, but
inherently, like with single player games, I think it's just inherent that you want to experience someone else's vision of a story that they want to tell. Like much in the same way as like reading a book or like watching a movie. Like you're watching the director, the author's like you're reading the author's like vision of what they have in their head. And I
Yeah,
think a single player experience should be like that in a sense. You should of course have some agency to solve the problems and do everything as you are one to do, but there should be like a path to guide you along that route. And of course
yeah,
that is different from multiplayer games like I mean, you know, multiplayer competitive games of course to a degree cooperative games as well, but you know,
yeah.
I agree with you.
I think like in this vein of like player expression and like the good and the bad of that, I think that what I've noticed is that to me the best games are like the most like I guess important games that it feels that I've played are games that have made intentional sacrifices. So
that's fair.
games that
Yeah,
intentionally hold back on something because it doesn't work, or like will intentionally do something that's like the less fun option
hmm
because it creates a more cohesive experience. Whereas I feel like the new Zelda games, that like all of the sacrifices that were made were like forced upon them. Like they were forcible sacrifices. Like this literally has to be sacrificed because it's completely at odds with every other thing that they're trying to go for.
oh yeah. I mean,
What are some examples of that?
I was just,
And
yeah, the narrative is what jumped to my
a
mind when you
narrative,
said that. Like,
yeah,
Yeah.
the
the
narrative in
narrative,
Breath of the
weapon
Wild was
items,
non-linear. You would pick a vision and go and see it, and then
yeah,
the Tears of the Kingdom, they're like, oh, or like, I guess the feedback of that was, oh, the story was so nothing. You just saw flashbacks in any order, which was, I think, a fine way to
yeah,
do that story. It just wasn't a great story. Tears of the Kingdom, I think,
right,
has a good story, but the cutscenes are found in area. Like what they should have done with that is they should have had you find the like, sure, go find the cutscenes that are they play in a certain order, but have them play in the same order, not to where it
Yeah,
is on the location, because that's even worse. Like it's against the
yeah,
idea of player freedom. It's like you're presenting the story. They presented the story terribly, basically, because you could see a cutscene
yeah,
out of sequence, out of order, and it didn't add mystery or intrigue as to when it happened. Like in Breath of the Wild, when it was more vague. In Tears of the Kingdom, it's like you
yeah,
have to watch them in order. And then with the dungeons in
Yeah,
Tears of the Kingdom, it's like they didn't know which one you were going to go to, so they give the same story cutscene. They use the same dialogue lines, and they didn't give any interesting perspective from the different characters. It was just the same rehashed stuff each time. Like
right. And
that
it's
like the way they
frustrating.
conveyed it was bad.
It's
yeah,
frustrating
and
because like it worked for Breath of the Wild, and I hesitate to say it worked because I think it's bad, but like in
right.
theory, it worked because it was like all of those cutscenes, all of those story beats were independent from each other. They didn't
Exactly.
lead into each other. And so when they took the same mechanics of that first game and said, "Oh, just slap it, copy paste onto the next one," but the story beats that they're presenting you are sequential, it just
Yeah,
doesn't
it's
work.
like a linear narrative. It doesn't
Yeah.
Yeah.
work. You're
It,
like you could see Rauru die like moments after learning who Rauru is.
Yeah,
Like,
you could if
Right.
you wanted to do it that way. It's completely possible.
yeah,
Like I said, what they should have done with that, if they could have presented a game that way, is have because I don't know if because obviously the locations where you found the memories are where the thing played out in Breath of the Wild. I don't know offhand if that was the case for Tears. I don't think it was though. I feel like because no, they were all in the past and they were just like why wasn't it you just find one and you get the next story beat? Why is it you find one and you're given a certain cutscene? Like
yeah,
just play it in the order depending on how many and I find more and I see more of the world then give me the next piece. It wasn't dependent on the location, with the context of Breath of the Wild. Like Breath of the Wild's story again just wasn't as good, but it was done significantly better in the concept of that game. So
yeah. And
yeah,
they're just so scared of locking you out of anything, right? So like the
which is
combat
wild.
is also another one of those sacrifices. Like it
Sure.
was like it was a sacrifice that was made because like the style of game forced it to be made. So then there was like this sort of lukewarm solution of like, okay, we have to sacrifice some amount of like satisfaction to like the progression in this game.
Hmm.
How do we like solve that so it's not just complete ass and it still ends up being um, almost just incomplete ass, like it's just weapon durability, right, is the solution. And then
Yeah.
like the story, they bar you off from like two cutscenes based on progression. But then the remaining 10, they're like, yeah, just go find them. Like, who cares if they're like super out of order and like everything gets
Right.
spoiled? Like, they're just like, we're not going to bar you off of like more than two because that would be insane and that's not what people want? Like, I think if there's anything that doesn't need to be sacrificed in this new style of Zelda game, it's like, it's narrative and like atmosphere. And like to some extent they get the atmosphere, but then all the places where you really want the atmosphere, it's just not there at all.
I don't
Sure.
know.
Like,
I don't know. I mean, I agree with like those things are important, but I don't know if I agree that those are the only things that like shouldn't be sacrificed. Because to
well,
me,
I just mean there's no reason to. Like,
oh
it's not
yeah,
like those should be prioritized over everything else. It's like
Yeah,
right.
I agree with
if
that.
you're
I do.
gonna be hacking off all of these things that people care about, like, why would you like make these sacrifices on things that are sort of just unnecessary? Like, you don't
Yeah.
have to sacrifice on mood and atmosphere and tone and characters. Like, you don't
Yeah,
have to do that, but they did anyway because they're
right,
so focused on their Minecraft like Roblox building mechanic. Like,
right. I
definitely most of
agree.
the dev time. Yeah, like, and I think it was fun for the time, but it's hard. It's also a hard system to return to. It's not really something I
yeah,
felt super compelled to be like, oh, I need to do as much as I can with this system. It's like, no, I'm just here for why I play single player games, which is
yeah,
what
yeah.
they should be
We're just
doing.
to, like have an experience and like
Yeah.
I
you
think
know
just my biggest issue is like as an adult that doesn't have like that much free time on my hands. It's like I'm constantly forced in the gaming industry to juggle if I want a single player game because I don't always, I like single player games. I like experiencing a story. And with those stories, I feel like I am forced to choose where to direct my time and to direct all of my time. Because every game that comes out now, seeing the success of Breath of the Wild, seeing like the success of like Skyrim, if you want to go back further, is like we need to be open world. We need to show off like our technical skills as a development company to like make this massive scale game where you're supposed to put in at least like 60 hours to get like a complete experience of it. And that doesn't necessarily mean completing the game, just like finishing it.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just it's so it's when you want to showcase how much your game can fit, you end up filling your game with a bunch of tiny little side objectives that are ultimately to me meaningless to accomplish. Like and I don't care about helping grandma cross the road. I as kind of funny in that and mean as that is, like I care about like getting to the end and beating the bad guy. Like grandma might be a fun little side quest, but like when all of the side quests leading up to and I think there is a way to balance it, but when all of the side quests leading up to the big boss are helping grandma cross the road,
Yeah.
none of it feels meaningful. None of it feels compelling. And having all of that scattered across the entire world where all of it is like either the same objective or like always the same road that you're helping grandma cross. It's just so tiring, and I don't want to spend 60 hours doing that. I don't want to spend 10 hours doing that.
Yeah. I mean, oftentimes, literally helping Koroks cross the road. Like,
Yeah, or well, from
Literally.
Tears of the Kingdom, it's the sign guy. It's just the same. There's
yeah, yeah,
variations of it, but it's like, oh, how can I fix this guy's sign this time? Like it's the same each time. So, or like, but like with again the slight variations. Like I get what you mean though. Like when you make a big open world game, it's like how do you make side content compelling? Um, but in terms of Zelda, it's like, oh, not even the main content matters. You can just go to the end if you want. Like I think that's like a fun gimmick, but it's not like I don't think that's like crucial to a game's identity either. Like
It's really good for like a concept, like and for like speedrunning communities, I think that's a really cool
yeah, but are
idea
we supposed to
too.
cater? Are we supposed to cater to them? I don't know.
Absolutely not.
Yeah,
No,
like
I mean
they
that's
take the
you
game and
should.
they do what they want with it, and that's great. But
I think you can build a game with speedrunning in mind, but if
oh,
it's
some
like
games do. Yeah,
if it's the foundation of what you're building, it better be built for that instead of a single player narrative.
yeah. Which I guess I mean part of it is like Zelda's not entirely there for the narrative, but in terms of what they, I think like Nintendo, the way they design these games is they want it to be like gameplay first, right? So they want it to be like fun to play, and that's why they make the world the way they do, and they put in these side objectives and things, and then the narrative and all this stuff comes in later. Um, but I think they need to be more proactive with a lot of those design philosophies, like you were saying. Like Majora's Mask, for example, has the best side content in any game. In fact, most people say it's better than the story. Like the story is good, it's fine, it's cute. The side content adds but because of the world and the setting, adds so much more depth and like really deep, like like psychological, like context to these people like in this doomed world and all this stuff and these things that happen to people and the good and the bad from that and you helping them and stuff and it's such a they put all that in such great context and into the world and that's why people like that side content so much and at Majora's Mask if you don't get all the masks and you don't do all the side quests you don't beat the game like that's just like to me like that's just how that works but like Breath of the Wild you can just do the dungeon or Tears of the Kingdom you can just do the dungeons and beat the final boss and beat the game, or skip the dungeons and just do the game. like they just leave. There's so much openness to it in comparison to Majora's Mask, where it's like such a tight, storied world where every little thing matters. Like that doesn't really happen in these open world games. You can spend as much or as little time as you want with it, which is
Hmm.
fine. But if you're gonna make, to me, again going back to Elden Ring a little bit, like if you're gonna make an open world game, make it so I'm compelled to see what's around every corner. Like Tears of the Kingdom, at a certain point, I didn't feel that way anymore. But there was a point of where it's like I'm not gonna see anything new anymore. I'm just gonna see the same enemies.
The
I'm
saying
gonna
that you already came first is like you
Yeah,
know,
sure.
like you're doing it all again, and there's hardly
Yeah.
any variation to what the feel of it is.
Yeah, which there's the casual appeal if it has to be easy to get into and not be super complex, but like, and that's what Elden Ring benefits from being an RPG is like you can change your build, you can change fundamentally how you change like how you play the game. And what Elden Ring rewards you with exploring is the combat and the enemy variety and the different encounters you're going to have and overcoming challenges and a boss and finding something new that you might use or you might not. Like, I think Zelda needs to incorporate some of that design philosophy where, like, you should be given one of like three different ways to go. Maybe you get like a shrine esque place, maybe like a puzzle gauntlet, or maybe you get into like a cave, right? That is like long and there's a boss at the end of it or something like, or or you just stumble across maybe one of the bigger dungeons. Because again, like what Elden Ring did was it had those linear castle areas that still had traditional Dark Souls dungeon design, and the fact that they had that variability of an open world and linear places was incredible. Like that's what Zelda needs. Is it needs like good linear contextual in the world dungeons that are worth doing either for a boss encounter or a heart or whatever, or like a weapon of some like or an item, something to add to your arsenal that changes how you play the game. Not cool. You did this. You solved this thing. Maybe the story as well, but like the story can just progress, and then you move on, and then you forgot what happened there because it was the same as the one before that. Like that didn't really happen in Elden Ring, I think. So that's kind of what I want. Like Elden Ring, I think is the next big giant in the talk of the open world video game space in terms of like what these games vibes are going for. Like and the fact of where you start in Elden Ring and you're given like one of a few different directions to go, and you can again it's still open world, but it's just not fully open. It's like it's open linearity, you know what I mean? Where it's like you can go this way, but you're gonna find this thing, and you go down this path, and there's one way to do that, right? Like Zelda, I think needs that. I don't know how they do it though. I don't know how they do it, and if they will, I don't know. Will they take cues from Elden Ring in this next game? That's pretty much my big question. That's what I want to see. I don't know if they will.
I think that they can. Like to an extent, I don't think it's unheard of to do like branching paths kind of things like that. I mean, the example that comes to my mind first is I think Baldur's Gate does something like that. Where depending on like the choices that you make, the different story options are available to you. I think that's very normal and very, easy to attain for a studio of like Zelda's size and everything for Nintendo. Um, yeah, I mean they've been doing it at least as far back as Shadow the Hedgehog. Like you got all those different endings as well. Um, yeah, I don't know. I definitely don't think it's an impossibility. The only thing that I would think of is maybe it's like a hardware limitation thing.
Oh,
Um,
it won't be on this one. Hopefully, like I would be appalled if it was. This one's supposed to be like a PS4 Pro. You can play The Witcher on the Switch one. I mean, you can get this to work. I don't
yeah,
think I don't th-
I would.
I don't think they're gonna be. I want this new game to look like Final Fantasy VII remake or have like a gritty edge to it or something, or maybe like a nice looking Twilight Princess. Like I don't necessarily think they're gonna do that, but they could. It's got to be
Yeah,
different. It has to look different than the last two games. Like we definitely need. It needs its own identity again. Like because these games have the same identity, and we've been in that identity for almost 10 years, and people are ready for something new. I know these games were successful. And it's easy to just point at them and look at the numbers and be like, "Oh, Zelda! This is the reason Zelda is successful. We're just going to keep doing this." Like, and there is merit to that, but at the same time, like Tears of the Kingdom is a sequel. It didn't sell as well, and it didn't have as long of a tail in the discussion in terms of the mindset of people. Like
and
all,
that's
and maybe I'm in a bubble, but like I feel like most people just complain about Tears of the Kingdom now. No one's talking about how great the game is anymore.
well, that's what I was like outlining to you earlier. Is like you know the the concern that I have is that Zelda is a property of Nintendo. And when you look at Nintendo's history, they did a lot of the same stuff that they did on the Wii in the Wii U. And I think what happened was they're looking at the Wii and seeing like all these massive sales numbers and seeing everything. But I don't think that that tells a complete picture of what the console was and of what those games were, because a lot of the success of that console came very early during the novelty stage of it. And during a certain point, I feel like the Wii kind of became like obsolete as far as like new innovations in gaming goes. And so when Nintendo made the Wii U, they repeated a lot of those same mistakes, and it's why the Wii U didn't. perform as well as they maybe expected it to. So when you look at and that's not a singular trend in Nintendo's history either. So the concern that I have is seeing the great sales numbers from Breath of the Wild. They repeated a lot of those mistakes in Tears of the Kingdom, which initially sold really, really well too. And I think I feared Nintendo may be tone deaf to the benefit of hindsight and the criticism that fans of Tears of the Kingdom and fans of Zelda have to offer, and they won't listen and will repeat the same mistakes in the next one.
Oh yeah,
And just it's just a cycle that'll continue until eventually, the franchise fails, and then Nintendo's no longer interested in making the next Zelda game.
Yeah,
yeah.
but
Well,
I don't think that's going to happen ever, though. Like in terms of them never trying to make games for it, it's seconded only by Mario, which is their entire identity.
That's true, but it feels like a lot of like flagship IPs of a lot of consoles lately have been falling
Oh,
by
you're
the
not wrong. I
wayside.
mean, that's all Western game dev bullshit, though. Like Halo failing.
Sure, but I mean, when was the last like thing you heard about Crash Bandicoot from Sony? Like
Well,
a lot of Sony IPs are dying as well.
yeah, well, that's a Sony management problem. Nintendo is really respectable of their own IP, but you look at Smash Brothers and the representation that franchises and gaming gets from that. Like that's very respectful. Sony just doesn't respect their old IP
I
because it doesn't drive up numbers. Like they have a
I
few
guess
franchises
that's
that are long legacy, but like, and to be fair with Crash, like Sony never owned Crash. That was a Naughty Dog that like IP that was sold to Universal or something, and then Sony never could get the rights back. But like, I know what you're saying. Like in terms of like legacy IP and long-standing franchises, like because of how long games take to make too. Like really, Sony only has God of War, and I think they're on a long break from that. But like they're not the same as Nintendo in terms of like respecting IP and like making games and
I get
franchises.
what you're saying, but you see like the history with at least like Star Fox and Metroid. Like those are not those are not franchise that have been treated very well by Nintendo,
I,
you know?
I, I would say that about I wouldn't say that about Metroid. I would say that about Star Fox. They don't know what the hell to do with Star Fox. They did Zero on the Wii U, and that was just 64 again, but worse. And then they don't know how to. And even with F Zero and games like that, it's like they just don't know. They're not interested in making a new one because they don't know how to make it fun and different and exciting.
Mhm.
Metroid, they just had Dread a
Yeah,
couple years ago and Prime Force coming out. So
I did mean to say F-Zero.
okay,
That's
yeah,
a
yeah.
mm,
They just don't know. I mean, they have F
I
Zero
got you.
99, but they don't know what to do with like a mainline game. But
Yeah.
that's to be determined, I guess. But yeah, sorry, Jared, did you have something earlier?
um, no, I mean like I don't know that Nintendo is super respectful of their IPs, but I think they're super respectful of Mario and uh Zelda, but Zelda kind of I don't know. I think kind of what Brandon said. I think that Nintendo's learning all of the wrong things from the success of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom.
It might be, yeah.
Uh, like I think they're for sure just learning the wrong things and like taking it as like what people want is all of this freedom when like there's like good things about that, but I don't know that that's like what people are really looking for.
No, I think it is what makes it like an appeal to the wider audience. But
It is.
most people in the wider audience, they get a Switch for whatever reason they want to. They play the game for a little bit, and most people don't finish the game. When you look at like the fans of the series, that's not the stuff that they want. And it's easy to, find a game that, was one of the only games available at when the system launched. See like, oh, all my friends are getting this console, maybe I could get it too and play games with them. And you get a single player game for yourself. You play it a few times, you don't touch it later. You find out later that there's a sequel to it. And you're like, oh, I liked playing it the first time. You get it, play it for, 15, 20 more hours. You don't think about it anymore. And you look at the sales figures like that, like yeah, you get a lot of people playing the game, but in terms of staying power and what the game means is like as an art piece and playing it to completion, because I mean, I guess it's common these days, but it shouldn't really be to ship a game that's like half finished. Like you have to have something to keep people around and want to keep playing it, coming back.
Yeah, well, with Zelda, I think like there's an argument both ways. I get what you mean with like maybe it didn't draw in the same people. I would be interested to see like what the overall player stats were in hours and beaten and stuff. Because like I want to say like Lexi, for example, she probably put in. I think she probably put in over 100 hours, but I don't think she ever beat the game. Like I'm sure that's happened to a number of people. Like I would be interested to see like the people who have beaten the game and if they wanted to see that type of game again. Like they should really run a survey for just like
Yeah, yeah.
Zelda. Like get like because the diehard people will fill it out and be like, yeah, I've played 200 hours of this game. I don't want it again though. Like, you know what I mean? And that's part of it is like these games. I like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom both aren't very replayable because at least to me, I mean, you could do things and solve things very differently, but in terms of like the narrative driving forward and the world discovery, like once you've seen it, you know what's there. There's no surprises. There's only 15 different enemy types. There's only 3 different weapons. You know, like your experience is going to be slightly different, but is it going to be all that compelling a second time? No, not for these games, not to me.
I yeah, I never really like I finished Tears of the Kingdom, but not really. Like those games are like I mean I think ultimately what the mass appeal turns into is like how easy is it to get your average person to want to play this game for like a couple hours, you know?
Hmm.
That's how they get their money. I mean, it's easy to get in there. I don't know though, like how many people have only played it for. I can think of one of my college buddies who bought a Switch and got Breath of the Wild, and I think he put 20 or 30 hours into it. There's definitely those types of people that like this just isn't their main bread and butter type of game, and they try it and they like it enough to go for that long, but then it doesn't keep their attention because it's just not that different or engaging the entire time. Which again, I think with how Elden Ring's world design is, because each area is so unique and the enemy encounters are so different and the patterns are so different, you're very engaged. Like, what's Elden Ring's platinum trophy acquirement on PlayStation? It's like insanely high. Like people have played it like 2 or 3 times through.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
people
Even though
getting the full platinum on that game is like, and Bloodborne is another example. Like the of those
it's like 10%.
insanely
Yeah.
high. Yeah, it's like insanely high platinums because it's just and those games sell gangbusters. Like they're just really popular and people see them all the way through. It's insane.
Yeah. And that's like I mean Bloodborne as somebody who's done that platinum, it's obnoxious as hell.
Yeah,
Like it is so obnoxious. Every single Souls game except maybe Elden Ring, the platinum is so obnoxious and difficult.
Elden Ring's was only annoying because Elden Ring the only ones I'm missing are I had a missable weapon in my main run and then I have to get the 2 other endings, so I'd have to play it 2 more times.
Yeah.
But I don't have to do all the
Like those
side stuff,
like
you know.
for how much Bloodborne sold, for 10% of the players to stick around and do the fucking chalice dungeons for 20 hours, like that's crazy.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
if Tears of the Kingdom or Breath of the Wild had platinum trophies and it was like get all of the Koroks, it'd be like point
yeah.
0.5.
That would be insane. I have that on Breath of the Wild, but
Maybe.
not on Tears. I would be
Yeah, because
super
like
interested to see how many people do that because the thing about like why I did it with Breath of the Wild is because I that is getting into every nook and cranny in the world, and I would have times where it'd be fun to just like see where some of them are and traverse there and find the thing, and it was just pretty chill. But like Tears of the Kingdom, it's like okay, there's like I got about half of them, but not quite. I probably got like 400 something out of 1,000. It's like okay, this is the same world. These are this very slightly different puzzles, um, and it, the experience and what you're doing isn't fundamentally different. It's not Elden Ring where you're thinking about what you're doing. It's like I'm just doing this to do it. It's like why do you even do that? Like people complain about the Koroks because they're the same thing repeated over and over, which again is the fundamental world design of these games is they're so open. They stick you in the middle. You pick a direction and go, and you're going to see the same things as a different direction because they have to present you the same opportunity in different ways. And I think
yeah,
they did that the best they can. That type of design philosophy for what that is makes sense. How do you make a better open world game as open as it is than these two Zelda games? I don't think you can, but that's why it needs to change for the next one. It's like it just has to be there has to be that flow and the sense of discovery and like changing how you play the game. Like Twilight Princess, even you would get new abilities, new combat things you could try out and do it that way. Like maybe the new Zelda game would do like it'd give you a new weapon or item like that you would get in a dungeon, but it just adds a different way to fight things, or it adds a new traversal option or something that you didn't have. Maybe it doesn't necessarily lock you out as hard as Metroidvanias do, but there needs to be like it just needs to be dialed in. It needs to be
I
more linear.
genuinely, I genuinely hope that, like, honestly, if Tears of the Kingdom just brought back the traditional, like, dungeon format, and you could do them in any order, and you could
And they've
get,
succeeded
like,
doing that. Like
and
other games do that well, like the
yeah,
two
and if
worlds.
you got, like, an item or something from each of those places, and maybe they don't help you in, like, or they aren't critical in, like, the next dungeon or something, but there are little spots for you to use them in if you're creative. Like, if they just went back to that format and just stuck 8 dungeons in random places in the world, I- it would have been, in my opinion, a much better game.
It would have been
Just
more
there
impactful,
would have
yeah.
been something compelling to explore, and somewhere compelling to play through. Like, and I think it's important to have a sense of guidance on where to go next.
Yeah, which I
Um,
think they do an okay job of still doing. Like, there's still a recommended golden path, I think.
I
Kind of,
agree with that,
you know.
but like, even if it was just do anything you want in any order, but here are like 8 meaningful big objectives instead of like a trillion little ones. Because even the dungeons that they have feel like nothing.
They, I mean, the most egregious example is the water temple in Tears of the Kingdom, just being 4 shrine puzzles glued together, and then you get a boss. Like that, that was like inherently bad dungeon design. I think the Breath of the Wild dungeons were better. They were like puzzle
Oh yeah.
boxes. They just weren't aesthetically interesting. And then
No.
they're like, okay, we're gonna make it aesthetically interesting for everyone. And then, but they were lame because they were just maps with 5, or 4 or 5 things to unlock the boss door. Which you can have like maybe one dungeon that's like that, but if it's every dungeon, it's like no, no, stop. It's like add a
Yeah.
thing where like there's two lock like add a thing where there are 2 locked doors in a room, and I have one key and I need to pick a way to go, and then I get locked into a combat encounter or something. Like they
Because
add
then,
there's so much ebb and flow in those older dungeons and like different ways of thinking about them that the newer ones just don't have.
because then at a point, it's like, why am I here? Why am I the player wasting my time doing all this shit? You know, like
Well,
I
because they want to have like storied big dungeon, like quote unquote dungeons, because that's what they're still known for. But like they present the,
right.
but the problem is they present their best puzzles in the shrines too, or like take away your
No,
weapons
what
or
I
something. They could do that in an entire dungeon if you wanted. Like,
Right. I mean, what I'm trying to say is, like, as a player, why am I doing all of these dungeons like when they feel like no different in terms of reward from the little shrines around the map, when I could just go to the boss now? What
oh,
is
sure. I
so
mean, yeah,
compelling
that no,
to,
that's the
to
thing is I think
keep me
those
running?
games on a fundamental level kind of fail at being compelling. In it, like they try to do it with the narrative, right? And they want you to see like what these big dungeons do, but like again, they aren't replayable. I don't think they're necessarily worth revisiting very soon, I suppose. I mean, obviously they're long games and you're supposed to just do it the one time, but I don't know. Like they just they don't stand out to me nearly as much as any dungeon in like from Ocarina to Skyward Sword in terms of the 3D dungeons. Like they just don't compare to any of those. Really. So, which is wild, but yeah, I'm trying to think of what else. Yeah, just so let's say they bring back weapon durability. How do you guys feel about that?
I think that'd be a huge mistake.
Oh yeah.
I think that's like the one thing that the mouth breathing like mass appeal audience actually rightfully hates.
There's a
Yeah.
lot of hate for it. My quick thoughts on it are they improved it in Tears of the Kingdom with the fusing. I just don't think it was a perfect system to begin with. I think it's a neat idea, but the fact that there's such a limit and there's this desire to get cool weapons only for them to go away and break, and you're trying to save them for a meaningful encounter. Oh wait, there are no meaningful encounters. Like, especially in Breath of the Wild, there was nothing that. I mean, Tears of the Kingdom had those dragons and the I'm forgetting the names, but the 3-headed dragon guys. They had like big encounters to use them on, but yeah, it's not. It's definitely not a perfect system. I would prefer if they had it to where again, like Elden Ring, you have maybe not to the extent of like hundreds of weapons, but like finding different weapons of a different class and maybe having those having different elements, and maybe there's a combination. Kid Icarus Uprising had a thing where there was like 10 or 12 different weapon classes, and some of them had different effects and abilities, and you could fuse them into getting different ones. So maybe they do something like that. But there's like, again, like 10 or 15 different ways to play the game, and you find different weapons in different places. I don't know. Again,
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind if they had like the bow and the bomb were like items that you could use additive to those, but like having like, I don't know, different weapon classes for things. So, like changing how what it needs to do is change the way you approach combat to more than 3 different ways. I would like to have like 10 different ways instead.
Mhm.
Like it's not going to be
Yeah,
the same
yeah.
as Elden Ring. It's not going to be action RPG. There's a million different ways because that game completely leans into the combat, where Zelda kind of makes up with more casually, not casual is not the right word, but more like easy. I guess just easier, more like entry level like combat where you don't have to. It's not as in depth. It's not as hardcore or whatever. That type of thing. But there needs to be the variability in it. There needs to be opportunity to find new ways to play the game later on. Elden Ring does that masterfully because you find a different weapon and you can try it and mess with it. And if you really like it, you keep using it until you find something else you like. Or you just use the same weapon the whole time, like I did, and you have fun. Um, but either way, like if Zelda had some variability in that, I think that would be awesome. I mean, you can still have this Master Sword, obviously. And that should just be the Master Sword. That shouldn't break or run out of energy. But you should have the different weapons that have different ways to fight and play the game. Because if you're going through it, I think an open world needs that. I think an open world needs you to have different ways to do different objectives rather than in Zelda where it's the same way you approach combat. Like the Great Plateau, self-contained, really cool, right? And all this stuff. You approach combat
Yeah.
the same way in those games. And it's in the same way from the Great Plateau than you do until the end of Tears of the Kingdom. You approach the game the same way because there's 3 different ways to play it, and you get these different weapons and plays the same. There needs to be
Mhm.
like, I guess, I don't know. Like it's not really RPG mechanics necessarily. You don't have to use RPG mechanics. I'm not saying they should or have to. I mean, they could, but I don't think they will. I think that's something hard. Bar none, there's not going to be like a level up system for tiers and stats because I don't even necessarily want like a skill tree because the skill trees are kind of a cheap ass way of doing that. I feel like integrate that, but like have like the skill tree be like integrated into the world. Like it's still like new moves or again new weapons or whatever. That's what I would want to see. It's not an easy thing to do. It's not a very easy request, but that's what I would prefer. And again, you wouldn't need durability from that because yeah, again, durability was just a way to have you like still having. There was always the moment of, oh, my weapon broke, but I have 10 more of these. Like it was a unique way to do things, but I don't think they can do it again. I think those are part of the identity of those games. It's just
Mhm.
what is the new identity of this new game going to ever look like? Because if it's relying too much on these 2 games, we're going to have a problem. And again, the weapon durability is fundamental to these games. And if it's going for something new, you shouldn't have that. I agree.
Yeah. Well said.
Yeah, we'll have to see. Let's see. Do you guys have any other hopes, dreams, thoughts that you want to see? There was a lot. I saw some rumblings online that they wanted to remake Ocarina or like Ocarina of Time could be like up for another remake for Switch just because it's such a generational game and it would make the more traditional fans happy. I don't necessarily know if it will happen, but what does a remake look like? That would it be just a 3DS? Would it be like a Final Fantasy situation where things are kind of different and bigger? I don't know. That's an idea though. Is maybe they go back to their older
Oh
games
boy.
and have the new one have the open air identity still. It's hard to say. Nothing's changing the old
Yeah, I
games
don't
as they
know.
are, but what's the future look like?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I I hope that if they do that, I hope they add some new things and some new ideas.
yeah, it's hard to say. Like, how do you
But
change
maybe
that
that's
game?
just, yeah, I don't know. I think
Yeah.
it's too risky for them to want to do that.
It is risky. Like, how do you change a game that's like so revolutionary for its time? Like, I could say like I don't know about Ocarina. I would maybe change things if they were going to redo Ocarina of Time, but I wouldn't think it'd change a thing about Majora's Mask. Like, I don't know. It's like, do people think that about Ocarina of Time? Could they not change anything about that? It's hard to say.
Mhm.
But anyway, sorry, I kind of derailed on that. Let's just hear what else you guys would want to see from the next game if you have anything else.
God, just bring back dungeons, man. Like,
I mean, that's kind of the
I
most important part for
I
me.
really just need for me and for what Zelda is, I just need a linear story of some kind. There can be
Yeah,
open world elements,
There's
I
no
just
way
want to
there's not
go.
going to be like open world elements again. Every Zelda game has open world elements. You know, like they all have big open areas that you can go find and discover things in. You just have it as tight as Skyward Sword, where there's like no like real sense of discovery or like way of opening something until you get it right. There's the Cloud Islands and all this stuff right with that game.
Mhm.
Um, and then obviously the antithesis of that being Breath of the Wild, where everything is just so open that there's not a lot of variability in the discovery and weapon or enemy variety and things too. So, um, but like again, I think the balance of everything comes down to the flow of the open world for me. If it's like your idea of, I think you start in, let's say you start at the bottom and then you just work your way up more north to the map like Elden Ring. Like you could have 3 dungeons in a first area, you go to those. Okay, great, that opens up the next area, and then there's like 5 more dungeons, and you can do those, and there's all these different things. Like,
Yeah, for sure. I'm dooming because I think that the direction to go is just not open world at all.
yeah, I mean, I
Um,
just don't see that. Unfortunately, I just don't see that from the design philosophies of what they want to do, and I
well, it's
can't
like
change that.
I think open world is fine, but like it seems like it seems like a similar conversation that people have about like hours per dollar. You know, like there's this
Sure.
weird jerk about like if I'm not getting 200 hours out of a game, like it's not worth the money.
Oh yeah, those are the
Uh,
worst types of people. Yeah.
that's like a really tough thing. But then also it's like if this open world isn't like bigger than Red Dead 2, then like it's not an open world and it doesn't count and it's
Mhm.
not good.
I would take a smaller scoped world. It doesn't have to be massive if it's not intentional. The thing is, and again, this is why I keep saying Elden Ring and Elden Ring over and over and over. Is that game is massive, but I wouldn't really change an hour of the exploration and the experience I had in that game because of how intentional it all was. Like I think they could do something like that, and I think that's what they're, with Zelda. That's the expectation. Is you're right. It does have to be a dollar per hour like thing for a lot of them. Again, mass appeal. And I'm not saying the world has to be as big as Elden Ring either. It just needs to have that fundamental flow to it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I guess the big question is, does that happen? Do we get a Zelda game that is taking hints? I think like baseline, it's like you start with what people liked about Breath of the Wild's open world, but then you have to blend in the Ocarina and Twilight, aspects of why people like those games so much. Is there a flow to this narrative? Is there these intentional, more linear dungeons that are more fun to explore and see, and that you can again find in an open world and do in any order? Like, I unfortunately I don't know. Just because they ever since the Link Between Worlds, like they haven't had you make it. They don't really make you do a dungeon one after the other. I just don't. I don't know that they'd go back to that
Yeah.
in a big mainline game. They could always do like a spin-offy type thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like I think like what I see right is the the whole reason that the open world genre exists at all is because we played linear games with like confined worlds and the worlds of those games were like compelling and interesting and we were like man I wish I could go over there,
Sure.
you know, and the
Right.
only reason that we wanted to go over there was because the worlds were like compelling and detailed and fully fleshed out that we
Yeah.
just wanted more of what we had, right?
Yeah. I
There's
agree with that.
when there's like an open world game that's just pointless and full of like fluff shit,
Yeah.
like it completely
I don't
neg-
care about what's over there.
yeah, we don't you no longer care about what's over there.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's
How
a
do you make the
that's a
world
very
more
self.
compelling? It's because they are giving you a linear narrative,
Well,
you could say. Like you are
yeah,
experiencing
well,
things as people have designed it. It's much more intentional that way.
yeah, it's like the way I see it is like if you're going to do an open world game, it should be only as big as you can like reasonably handle.
Yeah,
Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
50
it's just
hours.
hours too ambitious.
Yeah, how do you like and what's interesting, this is kind of a side tangent, is like um the Spider-Man games, like um were our open world games, there was so much fat and fluff to platinuming the first Spider-Man game. To get the platinum in the second one was half the time, and you pretty much had the same experience. Like it was just better because it wasn't padded. People were disappointed that there wasn't more to do, but when you realize that the more stuff there was to do was the same repeated tasks, like it was in the first game, it's not as good. Like there is so much improvement to be had from games from not being bloated. And these newer Zelda games, yeah, they are pretty bloated. I don't know how you find the balance of here's an open world game in it's a big open world. There's a flow to it. Every side quest is intentional. Um, this type like just dialing back the scope of it, but making everything more intentional is just I think fundamentally what they need to do. Because it'd be awesome to get like a 50, 70 hour game instead of a 200-hour game that I got more out of the 50 hours than the 200. Because that's how I felt about Spider-Man 2. So I played it. I played the first one for 70, and I played the second one for like 25, and the second one's a better game, bar none. So,
Yeah.
in terms of a game, I mean, the story was good in both, but like either way, like Zelda needs to do that too. That'd be awesome. I mean, that's how you get the perfect game. What I'm trying to think of is the perfect Zelda game. It just needs all these things that we've talked about.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, we've been going for almost an hour. Anyone else have anything else they want to add to this discussion? Should they just remake Twilight Princess for Switch and Wind Waker?
No.
Not remake, just port. How about just a port?
Oh, port for sure. Yeah.
No, remake, I don't think.
remake.
Yeah. No, it's going to be like a remaster, whatever.
Yeah.
They should probably do those. At least the thing is like we can bitch about the new games. At least there's no taking away the old ones. I probably play one of those every other year or so. I don't know what the new ones are gonna be like. They're just so much bigger and so much have so much more modern design philosophy that they're harder to go back to. I don't think they're bad games. I think they changed the industry, but it's just does it change again? I don't know. And actually something Brandon that you mentioned before is like how can Nintendo intentionally get ahead of the curve and like be so revolutionary? It's like it is like getting ahead and taking the feedback of the fans from these two games and listening to what they have to say and also seeing other games inspiration like what things could do. So I feel like there is a world where we do get a good Zelda game that is like Elden Ring and Twilight Princess. That's what
I do think Tears of the Kingdom was really, instead of trying to innovate and push the industry forward, I think it was riding the coattails of what made Breath of the Wild special. And the problem is that was 6 years after.
Yeah, so
the fact.
long after the fact. I mean, yeah, that's definitely true. Like we mentioned this earlier. Grant and Lexi are like the two casual gamers, capital C casual in this example. I actually don't know if Grant finished Tears of the Kingdom. Lexi didn't even finish it, like I said. But if you ask them which of those two they prefer, they both like Breath of the Wild more. Like the fact that Tears of the Kingdom didn't become people's favorite game of all time, like it does say quite a bit. I mean, people still think that about Breath of the Wild, sure, but and again, it did a lot for. I mean, we've been complaining about those games all the time, but the fact that those worlds don't have any invisible walls and do have as much variety in what you're seeing in terms of like different puzzles and well, I guess I've been complaining about the lack of variety, but there's still like a decent amount of variety for the scope that it had at the time. Like, it just doesn't have the quite variety of what they needed, to improve upon. So, I still think they're great games. Like I said, kind of going into this, I think they're the best open world games that I've played. Granted, I haven't played a ton of them. They're not my favorite genre to begin with. So I just like regular adventure games where there's a goal in mind. So, which those games have lesser extended. So I don't know if you guys have anything that you want to say nice about those games. If you have anything.
I'm good.
All right.
About Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild?
Yeah, if there's things that like because of how revolutionary they were, like was there any good to pull from that? Because most people will tell you all the great things about it, like it is a lot of people's favorite game.
Yeah.
And actually specifically because I already know what your answer is to this, Jared. But if you have another open world game in mind, which one you think is better?
Well, I think it's really obvious to point at Elden Ring, right?
Yeah.
But Elden Ring's another.
Game, I would point at it. Yeah, I would point at Elden Ring as a better open world game. Actually,
I think
in terms of
this might be a good discussion actually. Because I think FromSoft is actually so. I think FromSoft is an easier target to look at in terms of like open world syndrome and like what open worldness does to a game or
Yeah.
to a studio or like the property, whatever.
Yeah, sure.
So like Zelda, when I when I look back at uh, every Zelda game, right? Not bearing in mind the time that they came out, just as games on their own, I think that they're all at best, or like a lot of them at best, are like pretty good games um, that are generally carried by the IP, the art style, the music, the vibe.
Sure.
Like I
Those
think
are
that
very strong for all of them.
yeah, like I think Skyward Sword is like an average game that's carried really hard by the vibes.
It
Um,
has great vibes.
like the art style, the music, like everything about it is like so charming. But I think as a game, any Zelda game is not like really super compelling by today's standards, even the new ones, right?
Sure.
Because those games are compelling for 15 hours until you've like seen all the game has up its sleeve, and then it's like one of the worst games you've ever played because all of the like shiny paint has worn off and it's just dull and boring. Um, but I think From Software, like their most restricted game, um, is in my opinion like probably a top three game I've ever played, being Sekiro. Um,
Yeah, sure.
and that game makes a ton of intentional sacrifices, especially when you look at the Souls genre. Like it is still very much like a Souls game, just in the sense that it has like very noticeable From Software DNA. It's not like Armored Core, you know. But that game intentionally sacrifices a ton, and ends up being like refined to a near perfect level. Um, and
Yeah.
Elden Ring unintentionally sacrifices things and ends up having some like really annoying sore spots, just like enemy scaling,
Sure.
um, and like feeling like the game is very like RPG leaning and like build reliant, um, like more so than any other Souls game for sure. Like that game is on a first ever playthrough kind of exhausting if you're just trying to do like a whatever build. Um, whereas in Sekiro, there's no builds, right? It's just a skill tree effectively, and just like improving the main character. Um,
Interesting. Yeah, I haven't played
You know,
Sekiro, so.
there is
yeah,
a
it's
comparison that I just thought of just
yeah,
now. When you go out to eat at a restaurant and like you're going between two restaurants and one of them is like one of those like diners that has like a bajillion things on the
yep,
menu,
yeah,
you know,
exactly.
versus like you want to go to the burger place that has like you can get a cheeseburger or you can get a hot dog and those are like the only two things you can get
Yeah,
and
but
you
they're
choose
perfect.
there because they're just refined to perfection.
Yeah, because you're not getting fucking microwaved nachos
Right,
from.
versus like anything that's like average.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's the thing, right? Is like, as somebody who's worked in food, the most popular places are slop. It's like Olive Garden. Like that's where people want to go.
Right.
And it's like it's sort of mind blowing and strange to like think about, but like the average person who is not like considering many other factors than like their own convenience or satisfaction, like is not like at all concerned with like the quality of most things.
Hmm.
Like they're concerned with like what is available and what is like um going to cause them like the least amount of friction in their own like personal freedom.
Right.
So
So like
you're comparing these open air Zelda games to Olive Garden, is what you're
yeah, absolutely.
saying.
Absolutely. And I don't think it's necessarily Zelda games. I think Elden Ring is like the Olive Garden of From
Right.
Software games. And
Exactly.
I think that Elden Ring, it's like you can build and be anything and do whatever and go wherever. I think it's not nearly as like deeply flawed as the Zelda games. I think the Zelda games make the solutions that they come up with are far more infuriating and lame.
Yeah. And
Like weapon durability, and the non-linear narrative structure. Like I think that they're just really lame, unintelligent solutions to the open world problem. Um,
and I
whereas
guess it
Elden
should
Ring,
be sorry, I guess it should be said like you can still have a good time at Olive Garden. But like
yeah,
when
of
you
course,
objectively try and look at like what has the better food.
yeah, but it's like I haven't, I've been to Olive Garden, but I also haven't been to Olive Garden in like 7 years because I'm like I know what I'm gonna get there, and I know it's gonna
Exactly.
be underwhelming or it's gonna make me feel gross or I'm gonna like eat too much of it and feel bad.
And sometimes you're in the mood for that. But
Yeah,
like is it always the best thing for you? No.
no, no. It's like I have a microwave at home. Like that's it's like with the new Zelda games, it's like there's an entire industry of games that have infinite amounts of freedom if that's what you want. Like we don't need to be splitting a single player game down the middle and like giving you half of each experience.
Yeah.
It's so strange. Like it's in my opinion, it's almost like going to Olive Garden, but you can only choose from half the menu. So like you get the worst of both worlds. Like you don't get nearly as much choice as you think you do, and the food comes from a microwave. Like,
Right. Yeah, exactly.
and I think that it would maybe be a little unkind to call Elden Ring Olive Garden because I don't think that Elden Ring is nearly as accessible, and I think that the solutions it chooses are the more obvious and more, um, I guess, well tested, obtuse solutions. Like
Hmm.
enemies just scale to a point that they're ridiculous, so you have to play in a certain order.
Right.
Um, I think that there's some amount of the scaling that's kind of silly.
Well, it's not even
Hmm.
just the enemies. It's like you can't like fight. You can't like just go all the way to the top without fighting other things. Like again, it's that freedom
Right,
that I think
right.
adds to the intentionality of that. But yeah, I get
Yeah.
what you mean though.
Yeah,
Like the scaling is weird.
yeah, but ultimately the game locks your progression. Like at the end of the day, it locks your progression behind your skill, right? Like if you are just insanely fucking cracked at Elden Ring, like you could just do it. You could play it like you play Breath of the Wild and just go wherever you want and run past enemy mobs or like do some weird like buff routine shit and like one hit bosses, But
Yeah, it's definitely that's
like
definitely possible.
yeah, like Zelda, like it doesn't lock your progression at all. But as a result, like there's nothing there's nothing interesting to get to. Like
Yeah,
yeah, you can go anywhere. You can fight these enemies that you can maybe fight these enemies that you don't have the weapons for because at a certain point it's like this zero sum, um, just like stat check, which is also really annoying because Elden Ring doesn't have any of that. It's like functionally impossible to get stat checked in that game because no matter what, if you're good enough, you can just no hit a boss with a level 1 longsword at level 10 and beat it.
Yeah.
Um, which is why I think that Elden Ring like doesn't really need a solution to the open world problem because people who aren't that good will just play the game in a way that makes it easier for them. And people who are really good can just do whatever they want. People who are like in the middle like get a mix of both and
yeah.
like they can pick and choose. Like I played through the game recently, um, intentionally choosing just a very like normal build, just like super honest, just the new light ultra greatsword or like light greatsword. Um, no summons, just like a chill like off meta PVE build, and like it was great because it was just, it felt like, how good am I? Can I get through this just using my skill? Not like, do I have the mathematically correct amount of royal broadswords to like beat this enemy? Um,
Yeah,
and I
I
think,
agree with that.
and I think like, to me, the other part that's missing, that's very very clearly missing in the new Zelda games, is intrinsic reward. Um, because I think that the intrinsic reward of those games is like discovery,
Right.
but like at a certain point, you've discovered the 6 or so locations that they actually put time into
Yeah.
when they had a
Yeah.
moment when they had a moment away from like developing their Fortnite builder,
Mm-hmm.
and then the intrinsic value of the game is gone, and you have to like extrinsically create value by like digging into Ultra Hand and making something ridiculous, like if you're a psychopath, like actually trying to build something with their weird half-baked Fortnite mechanic.
Yeah.
uh, Whereas Elden Ring, like, it's intrinsically rewarding because the game is about your skill. So no matter what you do, where you go, how you build your character, like defeating a boss is going to feel good unless you're, patch 1.0 Rivers of Blood, that's just like L2ing it to death, right?
Yeah.
Um, but the Zelda games, they have this very shallow pool of intrinsically rewarding content, and everything else is just like your responsibility to make it fun.
Yeah. So how do they bring that back to the player then?
How do they
Or bring it back to where it is deeper intrinsic reward,
Yeah,
right? Like
well,
that's the solution.
yeah, the solution is to intentionally make sacrifices. Like the solution is like, if they want the intrinsically rewarding aspect of that game to be exploration, then it better be the most detailed, varied open world ever created. Because there's like, like if they're just gonna like hardline on this new concept, then the only thing that could ever be rewarding about those games, if they do continue to just dump resources into toy box mechanics, like the only thing that they could possibly do is just refine the open world to be like unlike anything else you've ever seen.
Yeah. Which I mean, they maybe could do that.
They could. Well, I think Elden Ring did that,
Yeah.
and also had the intrinsically rewarding aspect of skill-based combat.
Yeah. That's true.
You know, which is what I think is what is most shocking about Elden Ring, is because Elden Ring has everything that's rewarding about a first playthrough of Breath of the Wild in terms of exploration, and then some,
Oh yeah.
and also has like industry best combat. Um, and it's because they have always run on a model of making intentional sacrifices. Like those games don't have a ton of cutscenes. The narrative is very very subtle. Like
Yeah.
there's no like collectible nonsense. There's none of that. It's that game is just you and enemies and like
Yeah.
a few quests and some really interesting stuff to find, and
Mhm.
well thought out levels and bosses.
Yeah.
Like that game is 10% of what you could put in a game, but that 10%
Sure.
is refined almost as much as possible.
Yeah. So what? I guess last thought then is, what does the refinement of these open air Zelda games look like? Because I think you do need the puzzle elements. Like I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
and your combat's not going to be as focused as an Elden Ring, but you
right.
can bring
I,
in a
I
lot of
think
those other things though. I think you could bring in a varied open world with the interesting discoverability that adds to how you play the game. They could do that. I'm
yeah,
not saying again it's not going to be an RPG. It's not going to have like builds or in-depth combat like those games do, because I think there is a level of it's still a like not casually appeal game. I guess it is casual. It has casual. I'd say Zelda has more casual appeal than Elden Ring or From Soft games, but
Yeah,
like it needs that
I,
level of it's still E10 plus. Like I don't know.
yeah.
Like
I think when you think about it, like sliders, right? Like those like slider memes about like pick one or pick two, like get enough sleep, have a social life, keep up your grades,
yeah,
and you
sure.
can only pick two of them. Um, I
Yeah,
think that games for a long time had three sliders like that, where it was like gameplay, story, and like exploration slash atmosphere.
sure.
Like those were like the three things that you could choose from, but you could really only have two, and like the other one would kind of have to be like not as stellar. And I think
Yeah.
that Elden Ring is very obviously like world and atmosphere and gameplay,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And the story is light as it's always been, which I think has just been a strategic choice to keep things.
Yeah, it works for that openness of the game. Like there's still the flow, and the thing is, like the cutscenes, like you could still add things to that, but like
Yeah,
you
but
could.
it's
I'm
slots
not saying
in
they
it's
have to or
slots
they
into the
should.
vibe. Yeah,
Yeah, I guess that's
but
a good.
they've curated a vibe where the lack of story is appropriate, right? Because it's an intentional sacrifice.
Yeah,
They're like, yeah, we're not going to do a super fleshed out story because we have these other things going on, and that would also be sort of at odds with like the vibe of the world. Like we're not going to have a million characters because the
yeah,
vibe is supposed to be kind of desolate and unsettling and lonely. But Breath of the Wild, so like the open air Zelda games, um, pretty much like put all of their they like invented a new slider, right?
okay, yeah.
And
Well, they
what they
have like
did,
mix. They have a mix of all those things, but they're not the
yeah,
same severity. I'm sure.
yeah, and I think that like what they did, like for in terms of like the single player trifecta of experiences in just like your average, you know, story based game with combat and a world to explore, is they pumped up everything into the world and like their new slider, which is like innovation slash Instagram ability. And it's like how much can we make this single player game feel like a sandbox multiplayer PC game while also having a massive world with technically a lot to do, and then just completely get rid of like story and gameplay because or combat, I guess. Like gameplay's still there, but you get rid of
Yeah,
those
it's the
things
same
because
gameplay, right?
simply, yeah, because the combat is like their only intentional sacrifice, and the reason for that sacrifice is garbage. Like the reason is because if the combat's too in depth or detailed, like 9-year-olds can't play the game. Um, so we're just going to make the combat bad intentionally, um, which is sad and a little bit um, pathetic, I guess. But I think that to fix the new games, like they would have to completely put all of their like resources into content and like exploration and variety,
Mm-hmm.
like novelty, because those are like the best things of those games. And because Nintendo is like a Japanese corporation run by Japanese businessmen who like you know care about money above most things, like
Yeah, it's not unique to
they're
them,
not
but
they're
yeah,
not going to go back. They're not going to go back on making a game for 9-year-olds, right?
Right.
Like because 9-year-olds' parents are where the big bucks are, and like kids with no attention span is like where the money is.
Yeah.
So I think if you just double down on like the, super stimulating dopamine of like finding a bunch of new cool shit and paring back the world significantly to not be this vast, empty, like muddy texture ground, like you could have a really good game. I just don't know that it's actually possible for us to have a really good Zelda game ever again.
Yeah, it's hard to say if they're gonna apply those philosophies. I don't know all of that about the appealing to. I mean, it does have to appeal to the 9-year-olds, I guess. You do have a point of where like it needs that mass appeal. Is that?
Yeah.
But are the parents of the 9-year-olds the people that are buying these games the most? I don't know. I don't know about that necessarily.
Well,
a lot of the mass
Oh.
wide audience, sure, but like I know. I mean, I don't know a lot of 9-year-olds. I know a lot of people that aren't as into games that have played the game though. Like, there's a lot of casual, like just
Right.
adults too.
I think that's the same sphere, right? It's like people who are bad at video games. Like,
Right.
it is like who they're trying to tap into, like people who don't
Oh,
give a shit.
sure. Yeah. I mean, that's their whole brand.
Yeah,
The thing is, like,
but I don't. It's
or
just a shame that they did that with like one of their
with
two
Zelda, yeah.
franchises. Yeah, one of their
'Cause-
two franchises that are like supposed to be for a little bit more of like a mature audience or like
sure.
you know
Yeah.
less casual audience.
It's
Um,
yeah. It does tap into the. I mean, Zelda does blur the line a lot. I would say honestly, like what that made me think of is Mario. Like Mario has so much player expression through how you move in that game, and it's
yeah.
also just Mario, and you don't need to be that advanced. So like that has mass appeal, and that should be where their focus is.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, especially because I just don't care about Mario. You know, like selfishly, like dump all of your fucking like brain rotted, um, short form content coded garbage into Mario for all I care. Like, don't don't touch the stuff that's like your last vestiges of actual art
Yeah.
or with like actual like deeper appeal. But they're not interested in that. Like they're just not. They're not going to go from making billions of dollars selling what, like how many copies, like 21 million copies of Tears of the Kingdom or something,
Yeah, it's around that.
um to selling like 9 million. Like they're just not going to do that.
Yeah, that's. I mean, that's fair. It is kind of in the numbers. Like how, but how do you bring those numbers up? Wow. Well, like I don't know. Can the numbers go up with them making the changes that the hardcore audience wants?
um I mean, they could, right? Like in an ideal world, they totally could, or they could keep it around that level.
Yeah.
Um, but it would be a world where uh, ownership of an IP is dictated by your competence at handling that IP, and there wouldn't be copyright, and it just wouldn't exist because if you were good enough at creating the definitive experience with your IP, you wouldn't be concerned if anybody else could use it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think that the more grounded, realistic, not realistic, completely unrealistic, but more grounded way that it would work is if Zelda wasn't an exclusive and it was handled by an extremely competent third party, in tandem with Nintendo, like first party studios.
Sure.
Um, because I struggle to believe that Nintendo is going to have the resources or the willingness to do as much as they can with their new hardware. Like I just don't think they will.
Yeah,
It's
they
hard
do
to say.
rely on other things. Like
Yeah.
they're not like it's gonna be like nicer hardware, yes, but it's not like pushing the way that gamers want. It's just going to be an improvement of
Right.
what they're already doing, which was already underpowered hardware. But they saw so much success from that, unprecedented success from
I
Yeah.
2015
hesitate to
hardware.
agree. I hesitate to agree that that would be the solution because, like, if you look at Pokemon, That kind of feels like the same solution that you're proposing, and it's
Oh,
consistently shit.
yeah. Well, I think the solution that I'm proposing would absolutely graft on well to Pokemon.
Is
Um,
it not what Pokemon already is, though?
no, so like Pokemon is licensed by Nintendo, right?
Hmm.
Well,
But
it's a license, not exactly. The Pokemon's weird.
right,
Nintendo has a third stake in the IP. It's the
right.
Pokemon
It's like
Company,
a
Creatures,
muddy.
Game Freak, Nintendo. Like it's a conglomerate of all that stuff. It's such a big
Yeah.
brand to where it
So
has
they can
a
only
different
they can only
organization.
release Pokemon games on Nintendo
Yeah,
consoles,
yeah, they
right?
publish the games, but they're
Right.
not like
But it's
licensed either. Like
yeah, and they're not involved in making them, not in any major
not a Nintendo
sense.
like R&D studio. The development is handled by
Yeah,
Game
Game
Freak.
Freak.
Yeah.
Right. I
Um,
see what you're saying.
so it's like the solution would be for Pokemon to be public domain, and anyone who wanted to make a Pokemon game could make one. And in that world,
There's already people making great Pokemon games.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's like three dudes sitting in a fucking basement right now making a better Pokemon game than like Game Freak has ever made. You know,
Right. I see what you're saying.
right? Because like in that world, Game Freak would have gone underwater as soon as they released like Sun and Moon, or
Right.
or they would have like you know thrived because they would be forced to. Because if they
Mhm.
don't, like people who actually give a shit, who have like hearts and souls, are gonna make a game that's better than that.
Right.
Um,
And they're not crunched, to be fair. Like they're not on the public. Like for Pokemon specifically, they're not on the timeline of the IP of the cards and the the anime and all this stuff has to come out in
true.
time according to our timeline and our success and our money and our income, and it's just number go up because that's what it's been. Like
Yeah,
that's why the Game Freak games are shit, or like the new
yeah,
ones are so horribly optimized, is because they are crunched.
right. And the games are not even like that's not even their big thing anymore. Like
It's
that
not.
hasn't
No, the
been
games are like the foundation and what brings in the
right.
people, but they make more
Yeah,
money a year off of other things probably.
yeah.
Like
Off of
like
like six other different avenues. Like
yeah. Pokemon's just really big. That's a whole entire different discussion. But yes,
yeah,
like it's
with
insane.
like things with much higher like ROI, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
like the cards, you know,
Yeah, the cards do not cost much to print, but
right? Like the
they're
ROI
so
on
expensive.
trading cards, or like the ROI on Pokemon Go.
Yeah,
Um,
with ones and
the
zeros, which is
ROI,
true of all of them, but yeah,
yeah,
with
like the
Pokemon Go,
ROI on a $500 Lucario plush,
yeah, and the
like that's
Gardevoir,
gonna be
yeah.
way more than like the 100 million they turn over on the latest Pokemon game.
Hmm.
So they have no reason to make a Pokemon game that sells a lot because
They still
you
will.
know,
Fundamentally, like
yeah,
it's in the name, it's in the IP.
right. But if it was
Scarlet and
public
Violet
domain,
sold almost 30 million.
yeah. But if it was public domain and anybody could make that stuff, like we'd have billionaires that are actually worried, that are rightfully worried for just resting on their laurels always.
Yeah, IP is a pop or like yeah, copyright and all that is a protective thing
Yeah,
of the for that reasons. Yeah,
yeah, and it just like it enables complacency in any form of like commodified art, right?
yeah. That's why we should make this is all the game we've been talking about. We could just
I
Well,
do it
agree.
ourselves.
yeah, like I mean, there are many people that are competent and intelligent that could make it, and like I don't buy this whole thing that like a game has to be like accessible or easy or family friendly or like reach the broadest market possible to make money, right?
No, it doesn't have to. Like that's just it
Like
is a brand thing. Yeah, Baldur's Gate doesn't
Baldur's
do
Gate
that.
3.
Elden Ring doesn't do that. Yeah,
Yeah, Baldur's Gate 3 sold like almost as much as Tears of the Kingdom, right? Like didn't it
probably. I
sell
don't
like
know offhand, but
18 million or something?
it's a lot. Yeah.
And like Elden Ring I think sold more than Tears of the Kingdom.
At this point, I wouldn't be surprised. They're all around the 20 million mark, probably. It Takes Two sold
El-
2 million.
Elden
29.
Ring, I think, was 30 million. Like,
It could be. I
almost
mean,
as much.
and it's multi-platform, but yeah, like
Right.
all those games do
But
benefit for being multi-platform. But Nintendo like
but
has the inflation of that stuff.
yeah. But those are also like hardcore games. Like
They are, yeah.
the most hardcore experiences of their genre, arguably, in terms of like recent releases.
What's the best-selling hardcore Nintendo game?
I don't even know. I mean, what would you consider?
Zombie U.
Is it like Metroid Dread? Like that's a hard game. That's like just like a game.
Yeah. Well,
How
Zombie
many
U is
did that
Ubisoft, Brandon, but Metroid Dread sold like 2 or 3 million.
Wow, that's so pathetic.
Yeah, it probably. It's interesting. It probably could do pretty good on like if it came to PC or something.
Yeah.
You'd probably sell a few million more, but it's an IP rights thing. We'll have to see if Nintendo can hold out being exclusive as long as it has been. There's enough of it's like, the Mario Kart, Animal Crossing, and 3D Mario and Zelda. Like there's enough of those where they sell enough to where they don't need to go multi-plat, but there's a lot of low numbers but that just gets them by. Like that's just like in addition to. And then they keep their fans roped in with like monthly releases of these exclusives that only sell a few million, but that's like enough return for them on those games too. So like, and then the hardware obviously they do very well on with all their different investments. Like, their reasons they're successful make a lot of sense, and I still think it's a compelling platform. We'll just have to see if that continues into the Switch too, and with all this other stuff. But no, I get the points you're making. Yeah, it's interesting.
Well, I just think like to cut Nintendo some slack, right? As much as I don't want to. I think that outside of very small scope, not to get super like fucking alt right, all these new neo-lib woke games are ruining the gaming industry. I think that AAA games are not ruining the games industry. I think that super hyper researched, psychologically addictive, like games like Fortnite, or ironically Marvel Rivals, games that are like
Oh yeah, just trying to keep you invested,
like
right?
six different algorithms to like get you as invested and addicted as possible, which brings in what has Fortnite made over its lifetime, like $40 billion.
Oh, something insane to where like Disney needs to invest in their own like interactive world in Fortnite, and they have all these different modes,
Yeah.
and Fortnite will never die. That's just like, I mean, as close as we're gonna get to the idea of the Oasis from Ready Player One is already happening in Fortnite. Like kids just
Yeah.
go on like, we don't hang out anymore in person. I'm just gonna see you online in Fortnite later. Like it's just a lobby of where people will hang out and play. It's insane.
Yeah. Or like Grand Theft Auto,
Yeah, that's like kind of a more in-depth experience of that. I mean, GTA actually. So speaking of Grand Theft Auto, like Grand Theft Auto 6 is anticipated by a lot of analysts to be like the biggest like launch in entertainment history. Like bar none, it's gonna break records. It's gonna be like, it's gonna make so much money flow to like all that stuff because of like the ambition and the IP of Grand Theft Auto and what the online is gonna do after the fact with that too, obviously. But yeah, like Grand Theft Auto is gonna be huge. It's gonna be insane.
Yeah. And like I think that those games have pushed the market cap to a point where if you're not selling, at least 20 million like copies of a AAA game,
Yeah.
you're
Close.
failing.
Yeah, you're closing.
And it's like if
That's
you sell,
absolutely fundamentally like why the industry is in such pain right now, and why talented studios that are making great games are failing or closing and all that.
yeah, or being
Right.
forced to make a God of War live service game, like,
Yeah, Sony's live service
and
initiative was such bullshit. Like, so bad. A complete failure.
and like it's also not really their fault. It is their fault because they're billionaires and they're like, feeding the profit motive and pushing the market cap higher and higher.
And they're trying to trace
And
gems
making-
exactly. Yeah. Oh, Fortnite did really well. Let's make our own Fortnite. Oh wait, we don't have Thanos doing the gritty. We can't get that.
Yeah.
Like you're never gonna get that. Like that's it.
Yeah.
So
And now it's like having these IPs, like I think like over time, with the exception of, things like Pokemon, right?
Yeah.
Um, having these IPs is going to be a fucking blight for these companies because all of a sudden they're going to be stuck with like God of War, and it's like, oh my god, the people are expecting a real video game from us because we own Kratos. Like
Right.
that's so fucked. You know, I hate that we own this IP because the only thing we can do with it is like actually create something,
Yeah, they could
and
put they
that's
could they
not
could bring him back in Fortnite and get some of the revenue from that.
right. Right.
Because he's already been in that. Let's name the year because this is like when the world will explode according to this philosophy. When does Pokemon get officially put into Fortnite, like by Nintendo and by Pokemon
Mm,
Company? They don't need to do that, but imagine what would it mean if they did do that.
I
yeah.
don't I
I
don't
mean,
think I don't think Pokemon is going to be the first one in there. Just because I think it would be hard to
You mean from Nintendo?
um y- no, I think it would be hard to monetize Pokemon in Fortnite specifically unless you had like some trainers that you could buy skins for and then like certain like anthropomorphic like Pokemon like Lucario or like Gardevoir like those kinds
there's
of those kinds of mons like as
Yeah,
playable skin.
I'm just saying. I'm just talking like the finances of that, like what the money revenue would be, because like Nintendo did, like there was a point where I don't know who started it, probably Epic. They went to Nintendo, were like, hey, we'd like to get some of your characters in this, and Nintendo was like, great, yeah, or like Samus or something, and put Samus in Fortnite, and they were like, okay, but she can only be playable on Nintendo Switch, and they're like, no, we don't work like that. It has to be available everywhere. And Nintendo was like, okay, then never mind, we're not going to do that.
yeah. Well,
So that's just
I
how
don't.
that works.
Yeah.
Something's gonna have to
I'm saying
happen.
like
Like
Pokemon going in Fortnite would be like the end of the world, or something like
I
that. A
think like
combination of those IP because those are the two biggest things, two of the biggest
firstly,
things.
I think in order for that to happen, what would have to happen is like the United States like government worst case scenario of like the entire like cabinet dying in the same accident and having like the lowest guy on the totem pole take over. Um, there, Nintendo is too like entrenched in itself just with how they handle like copyright issues and stuff like that to ever change their mind on it. Like with even just like the retirement of one person.
Yeah, I mean we are
Um,
ending the days of the Miyamoto. Like he's mostly just a producer now, and I think he's like 80. You know,
yeah, but
we could see a very different Nintendo in 50 years.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I guess I don't know what exact like sales revenues would look like with that set though, but it would be far and away the most the best selling thing
It'd be something else for
that
sure.
Fortnite has done. The best
Yeah,
selling collab.
yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, it'd be insane. That said, that's quite a differentiation from Zelda, our main topic, and I'm still recording. So,
Yeah.
if we have any final thoughts, you can close us out. We've been going for like an hour and a half. So,
My final thought on the whole Zelda situation, um, is that I think no matter what, uh, we are not going to get the experience that we want. Um, I would assume or guess as long as we live. Zelda will be a franchise that has nostalgic games from an era where um, like effort and charm and personality translated well into money. Um,
yeah, it's smaller scope. There weren't as many gamers back then. GameCubes
right.
were hard to sell, so they had to
And
make
you
really good
know,
games for or rush games for the GameCube.
yeah, and it was before the well had been poisoned with um, game models that bring in world-ending amounts of money. Um, so like I think we just slowly see different things in games decline or be poisoned in different ways, whether it be advertisements in single player games, whether it be
Yeah, that
like
would
the
that would be not impossible. I've heard that tossed around before.
yeah, I mean the frog will be boiled until um, until the world is over, as far as I'm concerned. Like, I think that it's just like the inevitable consequence of not to be uh, that annoying person, but like the inevitable consequence of capitalism is like anything with inherent value will be eventually replaced and made obsolete by anything with monetary value.
Yeah.
Because most of the things that have actual inherent value that are actually like important to, you know, people's hearts or people's lives, um, don't make enough money, right?
Right.
And the end goal is to monetize all of those things that are necessary or important or um, interesting. Like the end goal is to monetize those things as much as possible until they've lost everything that made them interesting to begin with.
That's an interesting perspective because Nintendo has been resistant to like live service or player engagement and all this stuff for the longest time, and it's because they're behind the times in a lot of things. You could say that, sure, but it's also because I think they do hold a lot of art integrity to the games as much as they think they do, and maybe other people disagree. Like they are just like they put out a game and it sells and that's it. They don't drop the price because they can. It's Nintendo. They can get as much money as they can out of it. With what
Mm-hmm.
they're doing. I think if we see a live service Nintendo game, then maybe that's the beginning of the end there. Because they don't have
Well,
anything like that. Like they all have all these freeware games. They have like alternatives to that, but they don't have anything like that. I'm not and like Pokemon has that stuff on mobile and all this stuff, right? And even on Switch, they have like free to play games. Pokemon's dabbled
yeah,
into that from investment, probably investor pressure to like, hey, you have like all the big money is in these, free games, and then you buy skins like Pokemon Unite or something like that, or that's where the big money is. So then Pokemon can do stuff like that. It's like, can Nintendo's shareholders push Nintendo to do that with like a Zelda or a Mario? They've done things in the past. It's just they haven't necessarily stayed that way. They've dabbled with it on mobile. I guess they did have like the Mario Kart Live thing. Like that's kind of a live service game. They've never done that with like a main console game though. They've never done that on Nintendo Switch. You know what I mean? Like, will
Hmm.
Nintendo do a big live service game? Maybe
yeah.
maybe that's
I
what the next Zelda game is.
I don't think that they will. Right. I think that you're right in the sense that like Nintendo is like in it for the marathon, right? Like they're not in the industry for like the sprint to whatever is going to make the most money immediately at the detriment to their like reputation or what have you. Like I think that they are banking on the fact that like the big players will be stable and like fads will just die off.
Hmm.
Um,
Sure.
but I think that ultimately like the end doesn't look like like a live service Zelda game. I think that it just looks like no more Zelda games
Yeah.
because it becomes no longer economically feasible to um, create something that doesn't center like revenue at the core.
Yeah. And what is that? I guess what is it? Yeah, Nintendo's going to keep doing that as long as they can. I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and
So.
you'll see. I'm sure we already are seeing it with the new Zelda games. Is aggressive tactics to close the gap in the form of like mass appeal, right? Um, but I don't think that we're gonna like see them, make Pokemon Fortnite. I think we're gonna see them, try something like advertisements in games or microtransactions or something weird, some like alternative way of centering profit. And whether or not that works, it depends on nebulous factors that we have no control over. But
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see that in what 10 years looks like. I don't know if Nintendo would resort to that, but you're not wrong that they could try that if they didn't want to go with like industry trends that are also killing it. So
yeah,
that type of stuff. All right, Brandon, you got anything else before you wrap it up?
Nah, I think we're all right.
Sweet. All right. Well, thanks for joining me on this fun adventure of a discussion of the
Yeah.
industry as a whole and some Zelda stuff. We'll have to see what the next one looks like. We're probably. Oh, I will say, it'll probably come out in 2027, whatever the hell it looks like. Because maybe 2028. I mean, I imagine like. Hopefully they don't asset reflip and they probably have to deal with like design overhaul stuff. But and game development takes so long and we don't know what it's gonna look like. But I think we could get it teased like next year. I think we're imminently gonna see one on the new system. Like they want to push the hardware. They still make a ton of money off of the hardware. Like they made so much money off of the Switch, not having that, like having such old internals that were so cheap to make. So like, and they've never done a sale on it or like a price drop. Like you could never buy a new Switch for less than 300. So like, I think if they do a price drop on it, they are gonna like break the PS2 record, and it's possible anyway. I don't know if it's guaranteed, but like, will 10 million more people show up for a $200 Switch? I don't know. They probably just bought the Switch Lite or bought it used somewhere else, but hard to say. So, alrighty, fellas, we'll call it here. Thanks for joining.